Well, we're gonna try our hardest to not make people angry. That's my biggest fear. Like, we're gonna talk about Star Wars, this beloved thing, and everyone's going to be like, wow, you guys are the worst people and you have the worst opinions, which is fair. I don't know. Maybe I do. Yeah. Maybe I do have the worst opinions. Hello and welcome to the SnarkSquad pod. I am Nicole.
And I'm Marines.
And today we are talking about Star Wars The Force Awakens, which is obviously not the newest and most recent Star Wars movie, but it is the place that we started because we are both coming at this from the somewhat strange position of being adults who are super into pop culture and made it basically 3 decades without ever watching a single Star Wars movie. So, seems like a strange thing to do because we're talking about a Star Wars movie, and I feel like everybody in the world, everybody who is interested in this podcast has probably already seen this movie. However, just for the sake of flow, Mari, can you just explain the plot? What happened? What was this movie? What did we watch?
Well, dear listeners who probably know way more about Star Wars than I do, let me explain to you what I just watched, if I can. I feel like before we joined the movie, there's a lot of context that I miss, and something about a rebellion, and the resistance in that rebellion. So the good guys are still looking for Luke Skywalker, who is also a good guy. And, and there are a lot of different paths that cross. So we come across a pilot for the resistance. We come across a clone trooper, I think is what they're stormtrooper. Okay, there you go. Is what they're called. And he defects, he goes AWOL, and we come across like a scavenger living on a dusty planet, and all of their paths cross when they are charged with getting a piece of a map pointing to Luke Skywalker's location back to the resistance. Chaos ensues, like, fighting, people, bad people come after them, that kind of thing. But that's the gist of it, I think, right?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Of course, your summary left out who I think is the most important character, BB-8.
Right.
The first time that I watched this movie, so I rewatched it so we could talk about it, but I watched it for the first time a couple weeks ago because my family was going to see The Last Jedi, which is the moment when I was finally like, well, shit, I guess I have to watch the Star Wars movies because I gotta go see this other movie, which is clearly meant to be a sequel to The Force Awakens. So I watched this movie, and it was interesting to hear you describe it just now, because one of the things that I did before choosing to watch The Force Awakens was just sort of ask on Twitter how much context was actually necessary before going into The Last Jedi. And after watching The Force Awakens, I was like, yep, this all basically made sense to me. Everything that I knew already from pop culture, I had no difficulty understanding this movie. But I'm getting ahead of myself. BB-8. I was watching this movie with my boyfriend, and one of the first things that I said to him early on in the movie was that this is not believable because multiple people keep not sticking with BB-8, who is small and perfect and pure, and why do they keep telling BB-8 to go be on his own? I was very distressed by this.
I immediately felt about BB-8 the way that I felt about the CGI dog on Inhumans. Which Inhumans was 1,000% worse than this movie, obviously. Yes. But I immediately felt, as soon as he rolled onto the screen with his little squeaks and wobbles, I was like, I love you. I will die to protect you. No one else matters. This is it.
Yep, correct. So I guess the best place to start then is with this question of just how much you feel like pop culture prepared you for this viewing experience. One of the things when I posted on Twitter, how much do I need to watch? There were a number of people that suggested that I have to go back to the original trilogy, which I understand from the perspective of I think this thing is great, but I don't know. I did not find that to be true for the purposes of understanding this movie.
I don't think so either. I feel like I followed everything and I followed the storyline pretty well. I did randomly get the sense that I was missing something, like a reference or a joke or something may have had more meaning, and I wasn't fully grasping it because I didn't have the context. Those were like vague feelings because obviously I don't know what I don't know. It was just kind of like, maybe this is supposed to mean more. And I don't know if that was because some fault of the writing that was happening at that moment, or if it was indeed some piece of the backstory that I was missing. But overall, I definitely understood everything.
The only thing that jumped out at me was the Force. While I was watching it, I was like, is this like fully, are there rules to this thing? Mostly because in my head, I was thinking about kind of our experience with recapping stuff like this. And I was like, I could see this being a thing that we obsess over and that becomes a battle lines drawn in comments kind of deal. Is what are the rules? Who can do what? When can they do it? How can they do it? Et cetera, et cetera. But even that felt sort of vague and ambiguous in the context of the movie, not just it's vague and ambiguous because I don't get it. It felt a little bit like maybe that is, the point.
The Force, yeah.
Yes.
I was talking about this with some friends recently about stories that have magic systems that are sort of vague and whether you enjoy consuming those kinds of stories. So this, in this story specifically, the Force you were talking about, that it's just like a vague thing that ties everything together without more information. And I personally can absolutely consume stories that way. Like, I don't care. I don't care why
Same.
the Force
Yes.
works. Like,
yes.
I don't need any more information than that. But the Force was definitely one thing that I was like, am I missing something? And while I understood who were the good guys and who were the bad guys, I felt like I was missing context sometimes of like, were these the same exact bad guys that were in like the original? Were these bad guys reimagined? What? I don't know. It sometimes felt like I was lacking the how did we get here with these two groups of people, but that didn't take away from my understanding of the plot as a whole.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that did jump out at me in terms of am I missing something was the person who gives Poe the map in the very beginning of the movie. That was a moment that I was like, I feel as though you are maybe significant in some way, that maybe some people are watching this and it is full of meaning, and then you die. But to me, you are just a character who was here for a hot second and then you died.
That's an amazing example because, okay, we don't know who that character is. Still don't. Might be significant, might not. No idea. Don't know if, I felt for his death because it was a very gruesome scene and that it was like a mass murder kind of thing. So
yes.
I felt for his death in that sense. Still don't know who he is. But, pop culture and consuming of stories has taught me enough that he was like the wizened old man passing something on. So there was still an amount of, information and context there where I could be like, I understand who you are, wise old man, and the general idea of your point in the story, but I don't know who you are specifically. And that was the general feeling that I got several moments throughout this film.
Yeah, for sure. It felt like almost every character we were meeting outside of Poe, Finn, and Rey, who seemed pretty clearly constructed for this movie. They're all too young to have, been around in the original trilogy. But other than the three of them, I guess, and Kylo Ren too, other than them, I felt like anybody who was older than them, I'm like, should I know more about who you are? I mean, because beyond that, like Han Solo, Luke Skywalker, and Leia are like, and Darth Vader. That's the list of characters. And I'm like, yep, I know about you. I have a very, very vague, but like some sense of who you are as characters. But outside of that,
for me, it was those core four. I felt like Chewbacca.
Oh, sure, yes.
And of course, now that I'm like trying to like list my knowledge, I forget all their names.
What
but
are
like
Star
the two original robots.
Yeah.
R2D2 and the other one, whatever his name is, like
C3PO. Oh my god.
Yeah, that guy. Yeah, this is awful. People are like laughing at us right now as they listen.
To be clear, C3PO to me is the guy who takes me on Star Tours.
Yes. Every time. Very important touchstone.
Yes.
Other than that, I feel like I recognized there were things that I recognized, like the Millennium Falcon when it took off. I was like surprised that I recognized that, actually. I was like, wait, I think this is significant. There were other things that I was really surprised that I hadn't been spoiled for. There were pieces of information that were specific to this movie, but I was really surprised that I hadn't gotten it through spoilers or social media. So for instance, Kylo Ren is Han Solo and Leia's son. No idea. I didn't know that. And I feel like that would have been something that would have escaped somewhere in Tumblr somewhere or somehow.
Yeah.
But I didn't know that Han Solo died in this movie either. Did you know these things?
I did know both of these things. So the other sort of important piece of my Star Wars knowledge, aside from Star Tours, which is obviously a very important touchstone for your Star Wars knowledge, is so I went to grad school and like did a lot of fan studies stuff. And in terms of case studies on the dynamic between media and its fans, there's just more stuff about Star Wars than many other things because of the scale of its popularity and how long it has been a big thing and so on and so forth. So in addition to that, I also just really like sort of pop culture think pieces and stuff. And so for that sort of combination of things, I have come across a fair amount of information because I was always just like, well, I don't know that I'm ever going to watch these movies, or if I do, I, as a person, just don't really care that much about spoilers, which is maybe we could probably have a whole episode on this conversation of spoilers and whatnot, but I just don't really care. And so I have read a fair number of just like essays and stuff about Star Wars. And so I did pick up on both of those two pieces of information, but that's because I like consumed things that were, here is the thing about Star Wars and culture. And like, really, I care about the end culture bit, but I acquired some factoids along the way.
The only thing that I truly knew going into this, spoiler-wise, and I don't even know if it's a spoiler or more of like a fan thing, is that people ship Rey and Kylo Ren. That was pretty much the only thing that I had gleaned, because people are pretty passionate about that. And I guess the second movie, which I haven't seen, fed that in some way. So as people were coming out of this most recent movie, they were having a lot of emotions about that ship. But I came in prepared to hate it. I didn't know much of anything. I didn't know much about this Kylo Ren character. I just was ready as I sat down to hate it from like second one.
Who the fuck these people are, but I definitely hate the idea of them getting together.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's fair. Same. I guess before we get too much into any of the other details, just like a baseline question, did you enjoy this movie?
I did. I thought it was a solid movie. I did find myself a little bit bored at times. I thought the pacing wasn't off. I don't think the pacing was off. I think I found myself a little bit bored because even though I had a initial investment in Rey and in Finn, some of the middle, and as we were getting more characters introduced, I didn't always care about these other characters that the movie is assuming that you have investment in because you have prior knowledge. So I found some places a little laggy, but overall I thought it was a solid movie. I thought I was entertained. I just wasn't blown away. I think that this movie recycles a lot of themes that, to be fair, it probably has a lot of credit for initiating, right? It is a leader in this kind of film, in this genre. So I can't hate on it for recycling what it started, but I don't have that investment or context. So I was just kind of like, yeah, okay. Those are some tropes.
Yeah. I do want to come back to that, like, sort of reverse derivative feeling almost. But to the sort of the simple question, I personally had a ton of fun. I was not bored at any point in time. I do completely get what you're saying, though, with some of the, particularly the characters from the original trilogy, a lot of their stuff was very just sort of, ta-da, here is this person, and I know that you're very excited and you care a lot about this person, so here they are, and like all they kind of have to do is exist on your screen and you're invested because they're back. And without having that prior investment, those moments were a little bit lacking in substance, I guess. That said, I thought it was just a ridiculously fun romp of a movie. I don't think that it was a spectacularly well-told story. Like, I don't know. I kind of +1 to most of what you said, but I think it was, for me, just an incredibly fun experience.
I agree. I think that the plot overall wasn't the strongest thing I had ever seen in my life. The characters were great. And I think it was, like I said, I don't think that it was a pacing problem necessarily. I did have fun and it was very impressive to look at and to enjoy, but just maybe the plot was not as strong as I was expecting it.
Which, yeah, fair. Going back to this thing of like a feeling I've seen this before, but like actually you're experiencing that kind of in reverse, like recognizing that. So obviously sort of the overarching story itself is part of that. But there were a couple little moments too that I also had this feeling. The first big fight scene when Poe and Finn are escaping, my first thought was, this feels like a video game. And then my second thought was, oh man, I wonder how many video games are actually based on the visuals of video games are inspired by the way that these Star Wars fight scenes are shot. And it was very, very strange to have that sensation repeatedly. Just as like, I don't know, a weird quirk of coming at this movie in the way that we did. That sensation was just strange.
I will say that we started this whole thing off by saying that we had never seen any Star Wars movies. So I'm now going to go back and modify that information a little bit, because when this movie, The Force Awakens, actually was about to come out, I decided that I was going to go back and watch all 6 of the original movies or whatever it is. And I purchased them all. And I started with number 1. Well, so I started with A New Hope, and I watched 20 minutes before I was bored to tears and quit. So 20 minutes is actually all that I've watched of Star Wars. I will say that a lot of what I saw in those first 20 minutes was directly echoed in the beginning of The Force Awakens. So there's this whole thing where R2-D2 has information that he gets from Leia that he then needs to, like, he's the robot carrying the information. He comes across Luke Skywalker. So there is like direct tie-ins, almost as if it was a reimagining instead of a sequel, or, you know, that it came next in the story. I think it did that to like tip its hat to the original, but I had that feeling also of like, wait, I've seen this before, and I literally quit the first time because robots in the desert wasn't fun for me. Like,
okay, but when that robot is BB-8, then...
right? I was like, so literally my note was like, The Force Awakens does it better because BB-8 is immediately cuter. That was what immediately I'm like, okay, I do care about this robot in the desert.
I did have a couple people tell me when I was asking about what I should watch that this was essentially A New Hope, but like modern. Basically, there's more women and people of color and like, but like very similar story. I will say that in terms of things that were homages to the original, I assume this is the case. I cannot fathom why they would have made this choice otherwise. All of the wipes were like distractingly silly. It was just like, why is this happening in a movie that I'm watching now? I feel like this is a strange and weird thing that I guess if you love Star Wars, you're like, wow, this is fun because it's Star Wars. And I was like, please stop doing this. Why? The like circle wipes in particular, those were the worst. So I was just like, why are you doing this? It's Windows Movie Maker effect.
I had the same feeling about the credit, or, you know, the opening credits when it does that like scrolling.
The scroll.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's classic. You've got to put that in a Star Wars movie. I get it. But watching it now as someone who exists in 2018, I was like, why did anyone think that was a good idea ever? Like, I'm trying to read the scroll and like it takes forever. It's going slow. I had that moment where I was like, okay, I had to check myself and remind myself that this was a big deal and this is like iconic, but take it or leave it.
I felt that way a little bit when I was watching The Force Awakens, but I did obviously go see The Last Jedi in the theater. It was cool on the big screen. That was something that was like majestic in a way that it is not in other formats.
In my living room, it's not majestic.
It's not majestic.
I also, one other thing that it was weird to have kind of no context for, but then acquire it through this movie were the stormtroopers. I knew that they were villains. I knew they were bad guys, but they were like hazy bad guys to me because I don't know who they are, what they do kind of thing. They gave me almost like, and not to this extreme, but they gave me almost a Dalek or Cyberman from Doctor Who feel, where it's just kind of a silly looking thing and you don't really know what's going on there, which the Daleks and Cybermen arguably never get very scary, but the stormtroopers from that opening scene where they just kind of wreak havoc on this little village, I was immediately like, oh, I get it now. Like, you are the bad guys. Yeah.
You guys are not fucking around.
I don't like you like that. So that was very strange to me to be like, oh yeah, there's that thing. I know what that thing is. And then have that like moment of, oh, this is scary. I don't like it.
Oh shit.
Yeah.
I did not know what this thing was. And were there any other ways aside from that where this sort of differed from what you were expecting, where you were expecting something and it wasn't that, or was it for the most part what you were expecting it to be?
I think it was what I was expecting it to be. I knew that this was a story that was very concerned with good and evil, and I feel like we got that a lot and pretty clearly here, except for maybe arguably Kylo Ren is now like the embodiment of being like in the middle. Is he good or is he evil? But otherwise, I thought that it stuck pretty clearly to what I would have expected. There was nothing really that surprised me. And even the stormtroopers, it wasn't so much as like a surprise, like, oh my goodness, they're bad. But it was just like instant information, like this is why they're bad and this is how they're bad. So that I suddenly had, like you said, like it's a reverse context for all the other things I'd seen them in and how I seen them. I was like, okay, now I really get it.
Yes.
How about for you? Was there anything that you found surprising or that didn't live up to expectations specifically?
Nothing specific. I had this general sense that I think is more a me thing than anything else. But like I said, I thought it was a super fun movie. But I think I was expecting it to be this like really just artistic masterpiece in some way, which thinking about it afterwards was just a really silly sort of expectation to have. Like, clearly it's more just fun, action-packed. I should have expected that. And I didn't. So I don't know. Having heard so much about Star Wars through pop culture, you get this idea, and I think that maybe this is true for you too, but I kind of built it up in my head expectation wise, like, okay, but you forget that something that has mass appeal tends to be simpler. Yes, that is exactly what I was trying to get at. It like simplifies so that that's part of the reason it has mass appeal, is that a lot of people can come to this, enjoy it, and consume it with little resistance. And that's, I think, what we got in this movie. And I forgot maybe to expect that. And I was expecting kind of like the buildup of all the hype I've heard for 3 decades on this planet, basically. Right. And it's also, we happen to be in a sort of particular time in terms of media where, and especially as people who watch more TV shows than movies, where there's just a level of complexity in a lot of the stories that are being told now. I think that considering when this came out and became the phenomenon that it did is also relevant. We were talking about earlier that when some of the original characters were on screen, there was this sense of like just having them there and thinking or expecting the people to be very happy that they were just there. And I found, I don't know if this is me making it up in my own head, but I found even some of their dialogue to be very bland and simple.
And so hearing you talking about like putting it in the context of the time that when it came out and the time when these characters were created, I think is like dead on, because even some of their interactions I thought were just super simple.
Which is weird to me because it didn't feel like the interactions between the new characters were quite as simple as the interactions that the older characters had. Like, it felt like Han Solo and Leia, their interactions felt simpler, in part because I assume that they were sort of relying on the, weight of all, the decades of attachment that people feel for these characters. But it was strange to see that difference in terms of the complexity and simplicity that these characters were given. The character that it seemed like they were trying to imbue with the most complexity was maybe Kylo Ren. I guess complexity isn't correct. He was an interesting character because, as you mentioned earlier, this sort of thing of like the ambiguous light, dark lines. Anybody who doesn't already read our blog doesn't know that we have a long-standing contempt for this kind of thing.
Yes.
Of like, this character is better or more interesting or more likable because they're evil, but sometimes they're not. And so because sometimes they're not, we're supposed to find them wholly redeemed somehow. I don't know. Or not wholly redeemed, but they're interesting because of the couple times they weren't evil.
Or the brief flashes, the brief moments where you saw that they were struggling with being evil. Like, they had second thoughts before they gruesomely murdered somebody. That's the moment that's supposed to attract us to this character. So yeah, maybe you can't tell, but I hate it.
Yep.
So I mentioned earlier that all I knew was kind of about Kylo Ren and Rey being shipped, and I knew he was the villain, but I found that this character, I had very mixed feelings about this character, but mostly I think at the end of the day, I walked away from the movie thinking he was a petulant child. And I'm not sure how I feel about that.
You're not sure how you feel about that in terms of like in general, or like whether or not you're supposed to feel that way, or
both. Am I supposed to feel that way? And how do I like that characterization for what is the main villain of this story? That essentially what he is I feel like he's throwing a tantrum for most of the movie.
Yeah, I don't disagree.
Okay. Did you have a different experience?
I had the same experience. I'm not sure if I have anything to add.
Okay.
As with anything, you can't go into a sort of media consumption experience without all of your baggage, right? So I can't know what my feelings about all of this would be if I didn't already have that prior contempt for this particular brand of storytelling. I guess a part of me wonders, like, maybe it's, if I didn't already have all of that, I might have better feelings about it. But the more that I am thinking about it now, as we're talking about it, the more that I am annoyed by it.
I know that some of this annoyance is preemptive. Like, I'm getting annoyed before I have the correct amount of information. I don't think we were supposed to leave this movie specifically liking him at all, but because I have information from pop culture and spoilers and all of that, I'm already dreading any kind of redemption arc. I'm dreading any kind of feelings that he may develop or moments that he shares with, our main hero. I'm dreading that already, so I'm hating him now. And I know that's not fair, but like you said, you come into these things with all of your baggage, and this was never going to be a character that I enjoyed personally.
I am not actively dreading a redemption arc. I would hate it, but my feeling on that is that this whole story, as we've already said, is sort of built on this very simplistic idea of like good and evil, and not that there aren't gradations between and layers of complexity there too. Don't at me for insulting and reducing Star Wars, okay? I get that there's other stuff too, but at its core, there's this very strong, the light is good, the dark is bad thing going on there. And to that end, it seems pretty clear to me, at least, that this story is ultimately going to be him venturing into the dark, the end period. But if I'm wrong and there is a big redemption story, and that redemption is the end game for Kylo Ren. I agree. I'm gonna hate it.
Okay. That's the point I wanted you to get to, is that you would also hate it.
Friends are people who hate the same things as you.
Yay.
We should probably also talk about Rey. What did you think of Rey? What did you make of her?
I liked her. I think that they did a really great job introducing Rey, Finn, and BB-8, of course. BB-8 probably doesn't go in that category, but I'm throwing him in there.
Obviously.
I think they did a good job introducing her. I was invested in her story right away. I think that I was rooting for her a fair amount, and I'm interested in her. I don't know that they gave us a ton about her. I don't know. That's weird to say, because we do spend a ton of time with her, and I was invested. Like, I wanted her to win. I wanted her to survive, but I couldn't tell you a lot about Rey. Like right now, like what can I tell you about her as a character? Not much.
Well, she's very determined and scrappy. Those are things I'm into. I love a good, determined, scrappy underdog heroine. That's a thing that I'm into, and she fits that bill. One of the things we've been talking throughout about prior knowledge, and one of the things that I do remember hearing before seeing this movie is that people took issue with Rey being a Mary Sue, which... Another thing we can have a whole conversation about is how garbage that term is, or how garbage the way that people apply that term is, I guess. I don't know. Maybe there is some utility for the term, but I think it's one of those things, like the phrase fake news, that like has been abused, has been used and like dragged through the mud past the point of utility. Again, that's a whole other podcast. In the context of this story, the only place that I can see that claim being even remotely valid is with regards to the Force, like the fact that she wasn't trained in the Force and was able to like do so much stuff. But I don't understand enough about how the Force works for that to make any sense. And there's also when Kylo Ren goes to Snoke, was that the guy's name? Big bad guy? The hell was his name? Whatever. Everyone, this is another one of those moments everyone's laughing at us for being ignorant. Big, scary looking dude. He said to Kylo Ren, like, that as Kylo Ren's powers were growing, like the darkness and something about like darkness and light, like rising to meet it or whatever, like a matching sort of balancing thing, which to me seemed like sufficient, but also that's because everything surrounding the Force seemed kind of wishy-washy, that I was like, okay, sure, that's your like hand-wavy answer. Like this whole concept, this whole like source of magic is very hand-wavy and whatever. And I don't know. This is another one of those things where I don't know how much my reaction to this is tied to all of my existing baggage, right? Like for starters, my baggage with that term, Mary Sue. So I don't know. But to me, that didn't feel like a thing that was happening. But I'm curious how you felt about that element.
I don't think it was either. Again, I really liked Rey, and I was immediately invested in her. And I'm with you that I like what kind of character she represents. It is like this scrappy and determined person. My only complaint is that I want to see more. You know what I mean? Like, I want to see more from her. I think I would wanted to have more screen time with her. I want to know more about her background. There just wasn't a ton here, but I like who we were introduced to. And I don't have an issue, and I don't think it's Mary Sue, because I think the entire premise of this story really is about this idea of a chosen one. And if we're not mad about that when it was Luke Skywalker and he's the last Jedi, why would we be mad about that when it's Rey? Which I don't know if I'm getting that completely wrong, and I might be, and everyone's like laughing at me again.
Sure.
But the fact that she's a chosen one, either you're going to, again, that's one of those tropes that you either love or hate. And that's fair whether you love it or you hate it. But I love chosen one narratives. I love when people discover that they've got like this hidden well of power. And I thought it was very well done. I didn't think it was abusive in any way, because she still suffered. She got caught. She didn't just succeed without earning it. I feel like she earned what she got. She fought and all of that. So I did not get Mary Sue vibes.
She also had to be sort of like smart and resourceful beyond that too. Like, right, she has that big moment where she, you know, realizes that she can use the Force and she uses it to escape. But then once she has escaped, she's not using it. It is just her own resourcefulness that gets her, you know, around the base or wherever the hell they were until Finn and Han Solo showed up.
And even in the big showdown at the end where she's facing off with Kylo Ren, she's kind of sloppy. And he even tells her, like, you need training. It's not like she whips out this lightsaber and like, yeah, you know, she is sloppy. She's just getting to know her powers. So I think there was a level, in as much as there can be a level of believability in a Chosen One surprise you have powers narrative, I think they did a good job with that.
Yeah, I agree. So before we started recording this, I asked a friend of mine who is a hardcore Star Wars fan, what are some things that you would want to ask of us as, you know, very late entrants to the Star Wars universe? I asked him sort of for a list of questions. I've kind of been, most of what I've been saying so far has been kind of pulling from his list. One of the questions he asked me that I wasn't even going to bring up because I was like, this is a whole other conversation that could be its own separate thing. And maybe one day we will have a whole long conversation about fan identity. I definitely want to, but just as like in as simple a way as you can possibly answer this question, do you feel like you are now a fan of Star Wars?
Oh, this is hard.
It is, right?
I think we've had conversations about this in the past, and not to allude too much to that in here, but I feel like I probably read a lot more into what it takes to be a fan than you do. Mm-hmm. And I know in previous conversation, I've been like, but no, I'm not, like, I don't do this, this, and this. And you're like, you're a fan. Like, you know, like, it's fine. And just excited. Do you want to be a fan? You're a fan. So I feel like that's how the conversations have gone in the past. Mm-hmm. Am I now a fan of Star Wars? I don't think so. I don't think that I am yet. And not because of any of those other complicated ideas I have about fan identity and belonging to the community or anything like that, but just because I didn't love this. I enjoyed it and I had a good time and I would watch other Star Wars movies, but I didn't love this the way that I love other things that I consider myself a fan of, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. That is totally fair. Part of why I wasn't going to answer this question at all is because my immediate reaction to it was that if this were like anything else, I would probably say yes. But because it is Star Wars, I am infinitely more reluctant, in part because it is this thing that I have this idea of like a tremendous barrier to entry, because I have not seen any of the older films. And like, I mean, I probably will at some point now, but I'm also not in any hurry to go do that. I will totally watch this movie again. I would happily go back to the theater and watch The Last Jedi again. I'm kind of ambivalent about going back to the prior stuff. And so like there's that piece of it. And then there's also just like the idea of the Star Wars fan is this thing that I feel is just bizarrely culturally inaccessible in a way that I think is similar to how you feel about just being a fan in general. I don't normally feel that way, but I do about this particular thing, just because of like broader cultural context reasons.
If you could imagine having this conversation, and again, not that it's right to treat fandom in this manner, but imagine having the conversation where somebody was like, hey, Nicole, are you a fan of Star Wars? And you were like, yeah, I've seen 2 of the movies. Like, just imagine how that would go down with somebody else and be like, that's not how that works. Yes, exactly. Yes, that is precisely what it is. So I don't know, whatever. But again, there's like a whole other, I don't know, maybe we are going to have to start having podcast episodes that aren't about an additional piece of media that we're going to consume that week, because every week is an awful lot
of time to
Right.
spend consuming all the media. So maybe fan identity can be one of our upcoming non-media specific podcast episodes.
As well as anti-heroes.
Yeah, oh man, we touched on a lot of them today, actually. Other things, chosen one tropes, fan identity, anti-heroes, things that we have so many feelings about that we probably could talk for an hour about those other things.
Because this film is so tropey. This film is very, very tropey. So I think that the idea that we talked a lot about those things in this episode, and the idea that people feel we talked about bringing your own baggage to a lot of these characters, is just because they are pretty decent cutouts of things that we've encountered in media before.
Yes, which honestly is kind of my favorite stuff to talk about. I wouldn't say that it's my favorite stuff to consume, like, period, but my favorite stuff to talk about is stuff that is, like, fairly sort of tropey, and you can kind of walk through, this is sort of well-worn territory, and what was done differently, and how was it done differently, and is it, better, worse, whatever. Yeah, I like having those conversations. On that note, I think we've done this conversation. We did a Star Wars chat. If there's anything that you would like us to talk about, tropey or otherwise, let us know either on the site at SnarkSquad.com or on Twitter at Snark_squad to reach both of us, or you can find me at Sweeney Says.
And me at My Name is Marines.
Don't forget to subscribe to the, like, comment, subscribe. So that's not the thing on podcasts. Subscribe and share. What do we say? Yeah, that one. Tell all your friends.
To listen to two people who have no idea about Star Wars talk about Star Wars. We did it.
We did it. Success. Okay. Bye.
Bye.